A zoology student meets a uniquely civilized chimp during her time as an assistant researcher. Wrapped up in her principles, she becomes oblivious to the strange occurrences happening around her. One evening, an unidentified creature roams in the neighborhood and chases a cat to the rooftop of a random house where Becky lives. Her screams alert the parents, so they rush to her room. The mother comforts her child while the father locks the windows. Unbeknownst to them, the pigeon cage is wrecked and no bird remains. At London College of Sciences, Jane sits in on the class of Dr. Philip, an anthropology professor and animal researcher. He discusses the differences between humans and apes, so he explains how the 6-year-old male chimpanzee he's brought named Imp has an IQ of 85, which is within the bounds of humans. Then he instructs 3 students, David, Tom, and Dennis, to bring the chimp out of the cage. Unfortunately, the students fail to drag the chimp out, so the professor comments on how poorly they use their brains. He calls Imp and it walks toward him, mimicking him in front of the class. He asks about the difference again and calls Jane, who answers civilization. Before Philip can elaborate, another professor reminds him of the time, so he dismisses the class. Jane runs after the researcher to apply as an assistant, but Philip tells her it's impossible. Therefore, the student raises the law regarding gender equality, which catches his attention, so he lets Jane enter his office. Philip hands over a sealed tube with a specimen and explains that if Jane had read the job post well, she would have understood that it's for male volunteers who can give him their seed samples. Then, the professor closes the window and discovers pigeon feathers and traces of blood, making him scold Imp. He asks Jane about her educational background and discovers she's studying zoology. He lets her hold Imp while he checks the cage, explaining that it likes devouring cats, which Jane tuned in calmly before bidding goodbye. The doctor stops her and inquires if she's been in his classes, so the student tells him that she sits in because her boyfriend, David, is there, but she assures him that she also read his book, which made her decide to work with him. Due to this, Philip offers her to be an assistant in his house by the coast, which Jane happily agrees with. Weeks later, Jane rides a taxi to Philip's house while the driver informs her of the rabid dogs wandering about. Upon reaching the destination, she knocks on the door and is shocked to see a chimpanzee dressed like a butler. The male chimp, Link, grabs her bags, leading her to her room. He takes her hand and drags her to the bathroom, showing her the place before leaving. Looking out the window, she sees the doctor and hurries to greet him. She then answers the phone and a man named Bailey looks for Philip, so she asks him to wait as she informs the professor. Philip is surprised to see her, mistaking the date, so she explains that the taxi he arranged arrived at her house earlier. He suddenly threatens the 2 chimps in the area due to their misbehavior, but the student questions his approach since she believes that kindness is more effective with kids. The professor comments that chimpanzees are different from kids as they're 10 times stronger than human babies with the same temper tantrums, but Jane dismisses his point. She informs him about Bailey and the doctor rushes to answer the phone. Jane follows and overhears Philip negotiating with Bailey, a colleague, to resell a female chimpanzee that can't breed anymore. Then, the professor becomes more ambiguous and adds a request to take care of the old guy, too. As the conversation ends, Jane informs him that the little one went upstairs, so Philip introduces all his chimps. The youngest is Imp, the wild one is Voodoo, and the one in the butler suit is Link. Jane expresses her fascination with Link, but the doctor tells her that the animal has become mentally imbalanced. Philip instructs Link to chain Voodoo, but he gets ignored, so he authoritatively repeats his order, making it obey. Jane suggests sending it to the university rather than sell it to the zoo, but the professor highlights that the organization vehemently refuses the chimps, which is the main reason he works in this place. After Jane changes into jeans as instructed by the doctor, they share a cup of tea. Suddenly, loud noises from the chimps are heard, so he reassures Jane it's alright, since Link can control Voodoo. He adds that they can feed themselves as they hunt around. However, he points out some rules she must always apply. First, show them humans are dominant, never treat them as equals. Second, don't let things escalate, so forgive them at any cost. And lastly, don't meddle in their fights. Over dinner, Jane expresses her dream to live with animals, but the doctor narrates a story of a friend who did the same. His friend had an island where he raised a fully grown chimp. He visited the island daily until one day he got delayed. When the man returned to the island on a boat, the chimp saw him, pole vaulted toward him, and attacked him. Upon hearing the shocking story, Jane's concern goes to the chimp while Link smirks. Philip commands the chimpanzee to get his cigars as he asks his assistant about her family background and boyfriend, to which the woman openly answers. The doctor gives Link a cigar and matches, telling Jane that the chimp used to be called a master of fire in the circus. He narrates that he took the chimp as his first specimen because it's what he could afford back then, and now Link is already 45. Jane expresses her disappointment toward the people who taught Link such inappropriate acts. Finally, the chimp lights the cigar and the professor urges Jane to praise it, which she does dryly, but Philip exaggerates the compliment, making Link celebrate his success. The following day, Jane wakes up late and sees the professor and Link returning from picking up mail. Philip revels at the invitation he received from Harvard University regarding his research. Then he invites Jane to his lab, where she sees all 3 chimps. The professor instructs her to take a non-verbal IQ test against Imp, wherein a computer registers their answer and scores as they hit the button. As the test begins, Imp outsmarts Jane, who's preoccupied. When the doctor tells her a chimp is beating her, she starts taking the test seriously, which leads her to victory, frustrating Imp, Link, and the doctor himself. Jane declares the test isn't fair since she's obviously at an advantage, so Philip brings out all his learning aids to train his specimens. Jane argues that Imp has a different type of intelligence, which adds salt to the wound. Hence, the doctor points out that the missing 1% of their intelligence is the key to civilization, unlike her, who'd trade civilization to live with animals. Jane stubbornly disagrees with him, so he tells her she'll change her mind before leaving. The doctor reminds her not to meddle with the commotion in the lab later, since he'll give Voodoo a sedative for transportation. Then he gives Jane the sequel to his book. Soon, the trouble begins as Imp pesters the doctor to prevent him from injecting Voodoo. Bailey calls Philip since he's late for their appointment, and Jane tells him the professor is still busy. Then, Jane notices a door on the kitchen floor that leads to a wine cellar. Meanwhile, the doctor instructs Link to help him send Imp to its cage, but the chimp purposely ignores him. When Link finally stands, it releases Voodoo from its cage instead. Philip realizes too late that a group of wild chimpanzees surround him. On the other hand, Jane unravels a tunnel in the cellar leading to a rocky cliff edge. After her exploration, she calls out to Philip, who's in the lab, informing him about Bailey. However, the professor turns her away without opening the door. Soon, Link insists on lighting up the stove. Using the doctor's communication device, it tells Jane that it wants to cook the phone, but the assistant reiterates that fire is bad. She sends Link out of the house but realizes the doctor's car is gone, so she concludes that he already left with Voodoo. Upon returning home, she discovers that Link microwaved the telephone and she reprimands the chimp sternly. After a while, she reads the doctor's contacts list and discovers that Bailey is in London. That evening, Jane hears thumps in the lab, so she unlocks it and discovers Imp trapped between the bars of Voodoo's cage. Unbeknownst to her, Link is quietly observing her. Then, Jane comforts the panicking chimp. Imp points to the closet, so she concludes that the food storage is there. However, the chimp becomes frustrated while pointing at a closet door. When Jane finally opens it, the lifeless body of Voodoo falls. She covers its body with Link and Imp watching. The following day, the assistant plans to go back to town to find Philip, but she's greeted by Link, who growls at her when she mentions finding the doctor. The chimp follows her, so she throws a rock at him to turn him away. After a while, she feels another presence, thinking it's Link. Unfortunately, it's a rabid dog, so Jane runs and climbs a weird fence to protect herself. Just before she loses her grip, Link pounces on the dog and hits it on the pole. The assistant falls to the ground as the chimp releases the lifeless dog. Link proudly smiles and asks for a fist bump before returning home with Jane. When they arrive, the woman hears a phone ringing and rushes toward it. Upon answering, her concerned boyfriend asks how she is. She updates him on the current events, but the phone line gets disrupted as Link deliberately hangs on the telephone cables. Finally, it snaps and the line gets cut, leaving David and Jane frustrated. Late that night, Jane prepares for a bath, but when she's about to close the door, Link blocks it with his hand. Despite her instructions to leave her, the chimp deliberately stares at her body, so she grabs a robe to wear. The following day, Bailey barges into the mansion to take Voodoo and Link, but Jane stops him as much as she can. The man argues that he's waited for 2 days and must bring the chimps to the clients, so the assistant confesses that Voodoo is gone. Bailey wants to claim Voodoo's body and take down Link as requested by Philip, but Jane stops him since she can't believe the man. Link approaches, growling at him, so the man takes his tranquilizer gun to push through with his job. Imp messes with his tires, so his attention is diverted. Link grabs his gun, breaking its handle, so Bailey scampers to ride his van. He instructs Jane to get the doctor's weapons, but the woman ignores him, focusing on the welfare of the animals. Link lifts one side of the van and releases it, shaking the driver inside. Due to this, Bailey drives away and Jane sarcastically bids him goodbye. Later that day, Jane basks in her dream life with the chimps playing outside. Suddenly, she hears a thud and rushes over to them. She finds Link standing atop the well with Imp nowhere in sight. Jane scolds Link and rescues the trapped imp. Then she punishes the old chimp by not letting him into the house. Link sulks as the two leave, but he tries his best to find another entrance. Unfortunately, everything is closed and all he can do is watch Jane pampering Imp like a baby. The younger chimp teases Link, who helplessly remains outside, but then Imp clicks the record player and the voice of Philip plays. Jane tunes in and remembers some familiar parts. Finally, she recalls the doctor's voice on the day of the incident as he turned his assistant away from the lab. The following day, Jane walks to the main road and finds Bailey's empty van. She starts it, but the vehicle won't budge and Link pops out beside her. As she touches the clutch, the chimp creepily holds her hand while staring at her, so Jane tricks him into pushing the van to start it up. After a while, it finally moves, but as she celebrates leaving the place alone, it breaks down again. Then, Link continues pushing it despite Jane's commands to stop. As she nears the cliff's edge, she jumps out of the vehicle. Here, she sees Philip's wrecked car pushed off like the van. Jane has no choice but to walk back home with Link following her. When she nears the mansion, she runs as fast as possible and urges Imp to open the door. Fortunately, the younger chimp turns the knob just before Link pounces at Jane. Imp uses the communication device to tell Jane to end Link, but the woman scolds it, saying it's not how civilized people behave. Just as she spits the words, she realizes she's mistaken since the two aren't humans. Later, Jane prepares a shotgun by the corner of the room while she reads a fairy tale to Imp. Her peace is short-lived as she hears thumps as Link enters through the vents. Imp panics while Jane locks the other doors. Finally, Link breaks the wooden floorboard and infiltrates the house. Imp creates noise and panic, so the old chimp finds their hiding place. He continuously strikes the door to break in, and Jane prepares her weapon. Despite having trouble finding out how it works, she shoots the door where Link is. She peeps through the hole and finds drops of blood. Jane hurriedly drags Imp to escape from another door, but they're intercepted by Link, so she runs into the wine cellar. The young chimp goes to the secret tunnel, and the woman follows, feeling relieved upon seeing the sea. Meanwhile, David and his friends drive to Philip's house to check on Jane. When they arrive, Tom notices the blood on the ground while David courageously enters the house. They discover the chaotic surroundings, so Tom suggests leaving, and Dennis insists on calling the police. However, David refuses to leave as he's determined to find Jane. Dennis goes out to avoid further trouble, but he hears a thump by the well. He opens it and sees something at the bottom, so he lights a match to see it clearer. Unfortunately, he finds the lifeless body of Philip, and Link drags him into the well. Moments later, Tom hears sounds by the door and sees the mail slot moving. As he peeks into it, Link grabs his arm and pulls it out, making the man's head hit the door at a weird angle, ending his life. On the other hand, Jane follows Imp by the rocky cliffs and stumbles upon the lifeless body of Bailey. Surprised, she rolls down and returns to the mansion from the wine cellar passage. She grabs a knife before heading to the dining room where Link is. The chimp grabs a bread knife and gestures for Jane to let go of her blade. She lays it on the table and Link drops his own. The woman holds his hand but sees a car outside, so she eagerly asks if someone is around. Link grabs her arm, but she pushes him away to look for her boyfriend. Jane yells her boyfriend's name, which awakens David, who's subdued elsewhere in the mansion. Jane stops near the car and sees the key in it, and the old chimp growls at her. She dashes into the car and maneuvers it to hit Link, but the chimp jumps on its roof, so she hits the brake and the animal drops to the ground. Determined, Link climbs the rope in their jungle gym, so Jane drives to his pole to wreck it. Link falls on the windshield, rolling to the ground. Jane approaches the animal and is about to touch it when David shouts from a window in the mansion. Jane rushes to him and finds him with a broken leg. The two frantically run into every room in the mansion to escape Link, but the persistent chimp breaks in every time. The woman leads David to the cellar and locks the door, hoping Link can't follow. Then Jane notices the gas valve, so she switches it on. Afterwards, she yells at Link, commanding him not to touch matches and cigars since he's merely an animal. Finally, Link takes the bait and lights the cigar. The kitchen blows up, but the chimp survives as he looks around, marveling at the fire he's created. The blaze spread rapidly, especially upon reaching the lab. Soon, the house is engulfed in flames, so the couple grabs the chance to escape through the tunnel, but they stop walking due to the strong winds blowing at them as it gets drawn by the fire. Meanwhile, Link has removed his tuxedo with the cigar still in his mouth. He dangles on a chandelier, watching as the fire eats the mansion. He goes to the tower and celebrates his success. He lights another cigar, oblivious to what's happening, but the floor he's standing on suddenly collapses and he falls into the fiery pit. Soon after, the couple leaves the mansion. While Jane drives, she spots Imp by the road, so she happily welcomes him in the car as the injured David remains skeptical of the chimp.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.